So thank you for joining us for Leading Through Crises. Today we're going to be talking about the American Rescue Plan, what it means for nonprofits, and some other federal and state funds coming online. We are joined by Lucy Carter from CalNonprofits, Chris Hoene from the California Budget and Policy Center, and Emma Maxey and Ron Spencer, from the Los Angeles Small Business Administration. Before we dive in, just a few quick things of housekeeping. I want to make sure that everybody knows what CNM has available for you. Resources that are, all different types. We've got open office hours that we've been holding since the beginning of the pandemic. You can sign up for a free 15-minute session with any of our nonprofit experts, and we'll direct your call to somebody who is perfectly set up to answer your question. We have a full calendar of training programs and seminar certificates ready that are going to be, pretty much continuous here. I'll have a couple of those in a second, as well as our regularly updating nonprofit COVID resource guide. So we're going to be talking about a lot of those resources today. A lot of those are changing pretty quickly, but this is a good resource to check out if you're looking for a place to get started. A few upcoming trainings just to be aware of. We have a full calendar in April before we gear up for our conference in May. But a few sessions that might be of interest. We have a certificate program on self-resilience coming up starting on April 1st. We have a session on professional grant writing tactics starting on the 13th, as well as a whole primer on converting your virtual events and online fundraising events, both new events and converted virtual events. All of these you can find on our website at cnmsocal.org/events. And last but not least, I want to plug our upcoming conference. Our annual 501 conference will be May 11th and 12th. This year, the theme is renewal, looking forward and looking back, where we're going to be examining what really happened in the last year and figuring out what we want to take with us moving forward. Last up, just a few norms for this session. Today is a learning exchange. As Regina is going to mention, this is a moving target on this topic specifically. A lot of information is changing. We're going to do our best to, get you the information that we know right now. This session will be recorded, so feel free to speak, freely and candidly, but please do know that we're recording so that we can share this with people who are not able to join today. And just, general virtual meeting notes. Take care of yourself, please. Keep yourself on mute when not speaking, but feel free to unmute yourself to ask questions, put questions in the chat. We'd love to see your faces so we know who we're talking with, but definitely not required. And then otherwise, just keep an open mind, speak from your own experience, and treat everybody else with respect. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Regina to get us started.
Well, thanks, Aaron. And hi, everybody. Happy Friday. I'm Regina Birdsell at the Center for Nonprofit Management, and I am really excited to introduce you to our speakers today. These guys are rock stars, and I'm really grateful that they could carve out some time to spend some time with you all. So I don't know about you, but over the last couple of weeks, as I've been reading and hearing about the American Rescue Plan and the 1.9 trillion, and the response to the pandemic, the recovery on the economic impact of the pandemic, the support for schools, the vaccinations, the relief to families, the unemployment insurance, all of it was, I kept thinking, I'm not sure what this means for our sector. And that some of the money was going to be going through the county, and that it probably was over $1 trillion. And oh my gosh, somewhere that means that nonprofits are going to need to be accessing those dollars to put them to work in communities that are most vulnerable. And so we called on some friends, and those guys are going to be sharing what they know today. As Aaron mentioned, this is a moving target. It is changing quickly. But what we brought together was between Chris Hoene's experience and perspective from the California Budget and Policy Center on what some of these dollars might mean for the most vulnerable communities, and Lucy Salcido's Carter's experience as the public policy director for CalNonprofits, and really what money's coming into California, and even where your voice is going to matter right now. And our friends at the SBA who have been working, as you know, on the grants and forgivable loans that we all went through last year with PPP, And then now this year with some of the recovery dollars, there's a lot to talk about and unpack. But not everything is known. What they're going to share with you today is what we know as of 11:37 on Friday about what's happening in Washington. And probably by the time we wrap up in an hour, there might be news. So with that, I want to turn it over to Lucy from CalNonprofits, and a couple of things just to reinforce what Erin said. Please put stuff in the chats. This is supposed to be a conversation, not a presentation. They're going to share some slides so that we can keep it moving. There's going to be some links to some resources for you all. We want to answer as many questions as we can, and there may be things we just don't have the answer to yet. So with that in mind, Lucy, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you so much for being available today.
You bet. Well, hello, everybody. So Erin, if you would share my slides, and I'm going to start off doing some kind of overview about the new federal act. And then Chris and Emma and Ron are going to get into more detail about some aspects of the act. And then I'll, at the very end, do a little bit on state policy issues and some funding opportunities there too. So touching on a lot. I can't say that I have deep knowledge on all of these things, but at least you'll know about them. So let's go on to the next one. I also just wanted to let you know that CalNonprofits, if you don't know, is a policy alliance of more than 10,000 organizations around the state. And we do a lot of advocacy in Sacramento on behalf of the sector as a whole. So we don't get involved in subsector issues. I'm not going to talk about that today. So I'm not going to talk about childcare specifically or behavioral health services in particular. It'll be across the sector. So just let's dig in now to the American Rescue Plan Act. As Regina mentioned, there's $1.9 trillion in relief funds overall. And I want to focus on the ones that I think are going to be most relevant for nonprofits. There's a little over $7 billion more for the PPP. And there are also some additional eligibility changes for larger nonprofits. I'm sure Emma and Ron are going to get into more details about that. But if you have locations with fewer than 500 employees in some cases and fewer than 300 employees in other cases, as a large nonprofit, you can now apply and be eligible for a PPP. Forgivable loans. So that's really good news. And I know there were a lot of nonprofits advocating for that. There's also more money for the SVOG or Shuttered Venues Operators Grant Program, which is a mouthful, for venues that have been shuttered, an additional $1 billion in change. So that's really exciting. That program hasn't started yet, but will be starting in April, is my understanding. There's also a change in the federal subsidy for unemployment insurance. The current amount has been 50%. So if you're a self-insured nonprofit, the feds have been covering 50% of what you need to pay to the state. Beginning in March, that has increased now to 75%. It's not retroactive, unfortunately, but it does go through September 6th. So you'll only be responsible for 25% if you are a self-insured nonprofit. The Act also extends the employee retention tax credit through the end of the calendar year, and I'll go into that a little bit more. I can't say I'm an expert on it, but I did want to mention it because I think it gets overlooked by nonprofits sometimes. And then there is a lot of funding going to the state and to local governments. And I want to dig into that a little bit more. And before we do that, I also wanted to mention that the Act extends paid leave tax credit for employers. So I encourage you to look into that. It extends it through September 30th and increases the amount of the tax credit that you can claim. So if you think you might qualify for that, if you have employees that have taken family leave, you might be eligible. So, and then I'm not going to get into any of the individual benefits that the Act provides. The stimulus payments and that, but I did want to say that the act extends the suspension of student loan debt payments through September of this year. And I raised that because a lot of nonprofit employees have student loan debt. So this is really a great gift for those people who have those loans. We can go to the next slide. So I wanted to dig in a little bit on the local government funding. There's $26 billion going to the state overall, and $16 billion going to California cities and counties. But what I really wanted to zero in on is the money going to LA County and City of LA. So you can see it's almost $2 billion to LA County and a little over $1 billion to the City of Los Angeles. And there are charts that you can access that will show you how much your city or county is getting if you're not all in LA. I saw some people who I think are in other counties. So I really encourage you to do that. We can go to the next slide now. We have a real opportunity here to advocate to make sure that local funding goes to nonprofits. It's been all over the map, the CARES Act funding, frankly, and it has varied a lot from county to county and city to city. But I really encourage you to reach out to your local elected officials and ask about where the local money is going and make the argument for why some of it at least needs to go to nonprofits. We just sent a letter out. If you're on our email list, you will have gotten it from our CEO directly to city and county leaders, explaining to them why they need to make sure that a portion of this funding goes to nonprofits. You can access a copy of that letter and get a PDF of it and send it to your own elected officials if you like, with your own comments on our website, which is at the end of my presentation, but it's CalNonprofits.org. Let's keep going. So I wanted to just give you a little bit of information about the Employee Retention Tax Credit, not because I'm an expert on it, but because I think it's good for you to know about it. It's less talked about. So it is a refundable credit that employers can use to claim for certain wages, including some health insurance costs that have been paid to keep employees on staff. And in the past, it was 50% of wages up to $10,000 annually. Those numbers have been increased considerably. It's now 70% of wages up to $10K per quarter. And that would then be up to $7,000 per worker per quarter this year. And there are some requirements in order to be eligible. You have to have been either partially or fully closed during the quarter that you want to claim. But you can use the Employee Retention Tax Credit even if you have received or are going to receive a PPP forgivable loan. So I wanted to say that because early on with the CARES Act, you couldn't get both, but now you can. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Chris to dig in a little more.
Great.
And I'm available for questions later, whenever. So, Chris, sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. Thanks for that super helpful overview. I'm happy to be with you all here today. So I'm just going to talk about a few other areas, and we'll do a little of the subsector stuff just so people know some key areas of the Act that may be of interest. So I just want to piggyback on the direct aid to nonprofits opportunity. There is an additional $15 billion that's going into a program called the Economic Injury Disaster Loans, or EIDLs. These are loans to nonprofits. They are interest-based loans, so it is an issue that many nonprofits would prefer to have interest-free loans. That would be much more helpful, but there is a loan program. To qualify, you have to have less than 300 employees, which is of course typical for most nonprofits, and have experienced at least a 30% reduction in revenues between the 1st of March in 2020 and the end of December. So it has some constraints on it, but there is a loan program available. And that's in addition to what Lucy outlined with the PPP loans and the employee retention tax credit, unemployment insurance, paid time off, paid leave kinds of credits that are out there. There are a few key areas where nonprofits are going to be the primary or among the primary delivery agents for the federal aid, that where we know now, we may not know as much about how exactly the dollars will flow or when, probably know less about the when, to be honest. But first key area I want to highlight is childcare, where there's $4 billion that are going to come into California. They're going to come in largely in two pots. They're going to come through the existing childcare development block grant at the federal level. And there's flexibility there. The dollars can be used for facility improvements, for COVID-19 related responses and upgrades, to pay providers. And this piggybacks on earlier aid that came through the CARES Act in 2020. There's also another pot of funds, more than half of it, that go into stabilization grants for childcare providers and centers that the state will administer. So the state has to create a grant program that nonprofit childcare providers and centers can apply for. So that will be something to watch for. It will also be something to keep an eye on, because how fast the state can stand up that grant program and what the eligibility levels they put on it will be, that's all still to be defined, but there's significant funding there. I also want to note that indirectly, the federal act increases the child care dependent tax credit for households to offset some of their child care costs, and it increases it in significant ways where there are going to be a lot more households that receive this credit, and it's going to put a lot more dollars in their pockets to pay for childcare, which I think indirectly will also benefit childcare providers who will see more market for people who have some resources to pay for childcare. There's also rental assistance is going to be another place where nonprofits are going to be instrumental along with local governments. The dollars will in part flow through local partner network organizations, which is the sort of technical term for the organizations that are nonprofits that are helping people apply for the rental assistance. So there'll be some funding there. There are also going to be funding that comes into local governments, and those local governments in many instances also work with nonprofits and community-based organizations. So there should be some funding that I don't know exactly how much. And similarly, there'll be some funding around counseling services in the homelessness and housing arena. And then last area I wanted to note, there is in the behavioral health arena, where the money that's in the federal act for substance abuse prevention and community health clinics is also going to in many instances come to and through nonprofit organizations that deliver those services. So those are the big areas where I see the nonprofit community as being kind of the core service delivery provider, or one of the core service delivery providers. Last couple of things I just wanted to say is that there are also other places or opportunities to highlight here. So there's going to be a lot of interest in uptake and participation and in the outreach involved in that to get people signed up for some of the other aspects of the act. There's a whole series of tax credits for low-income households that get significantly expanded in the American Rescue Plan. And they're going to require, or they're going to largely depend on people filing their taxes in 2020 or filing their taxes in 2021. And that means we're going to need to get all these newly eligible people, because we're expanding these tax credits to people who didn't receive them previously, to sign up in order to get the benefits. Some of with the state's flexible dollars, or maybe some of the local government flexible dollars, could end up coming to nonprofit organizations to help with that outreach and participation. And that's an advocacy opportunity that we need to push the state to be doing, because we're going to need that participation assistance. I think the same thing is true in the food assistance arena, where there's additional federal aid, and in the childcare arena, where there are going to be these grants programs. So, and then last thing I just wanted to say, not about the federal dollars, but another opportunity for nonprofits to think about is how philanthropy steps in here. So I'm already hearing and seeing philanthropy in California step in and ask questions like, how can we help ensure that these new funds are administered and implemented effectively? And so they're asking questions about participation rates, outreach to the newly eligible audiences, making sure people can receive the benefits. And so if philanthropy starts shifting some dollars into that space in order to leverage the American Rescue Plan, there may be opportunities for nonprofits to apply, to get in and help with those on those opportunities. So I'll stop there.
Well, thanks, Chris. I think let's go to the SBA and Ron Spencer and Emma Maxey. You want to take it from here?
You're
Yeah.
muted, Ron.
Okay, I think we can't hear you, Ron.
Oh, yeah. I like to start off by saying we were talking in the beginning about how things change, and this is a moving target. Em and I had a set of presentations for you all that we thought would be more conducive to the group, but as we were doing that, another set of details came out. So we have 16 slides that Em and I are going to go through. I'm going to kind of go through some of these high level, and then we can kind of connect the dots and ask some other questions, follow-up questions. But I'd like to get started by saying this presentation provides a general overview of the programs the SBA is administering related to provisions in the economic aid to hard-hit small businesses, nonprofits, and the Venues Act, which is the Economic Aid Act. Next slide, please. We had mentioned the Shuttered Venues Operators Grant, which we commonly refer to as the SVOG. And the first topic is everybody's been asking questions, when will we be able to get applications? So that has been finalized April 8th. Applications are slated to open. And then as you move into March, as of March 24th, almost 41,000 people who either already signed up via the application portal or expressed interest in receiving the SVOG updates following the mid-January national introduction via webinar about the SVOG program. And then as well on SVOG National Public Information Webinar, which we anticipate a lot of people will have interest in, since the applications will be opened up on April 8th. We think there's going to be quite a bit of interest in that. And you'll hear me talk throughout about the websites where you can get links to information as well as the frequently asked questions, because that has morphed into about 24 pages of FAQs. Originally it was like eight pages. So now with the help of the general public with more questions, it is spiraled up to where it is right now. And one key point, as I mentioned throughout, is the application takes a lot of preparation. And the first step is the government system of awards management, which we refer to as the SAMS.gov. That's imperative and one of the first steps a person has to take to get into the system to be considered for the SVOG grant. If you look at the COVID-19, the IDLES, the SBA will increase the COVID-19 disaster maximum amount to 24 months of economic injury up to $500,000. Again, there's websites that give you more pertinent details pertaining to the changes in the amount. The new cap is $500,000. Next slide. There's also, we learned, as we all learned, with $1.9 trillion out there, people have issues with identity theft, and that's a very key component of it. So there's a website available to educate everyone and to inform the public as well with the how to report theft and fraud. Under the Americans Rescue Plan Act, the new programs, I just touched briefly on this. Every entity out there, the restaurant entity as well as other entities, it's been set aside a $28.6 billion for the new Restaurants Revitalization Fund to help restaurants. And I think it's a maximum of $5 million per grant location and the aggregate of up to $10 million for that entity if they qualify. So I'll just glean over that part there. Also, as well as the Americans contained in the Americans Rescue Plan Act new programs is the community navigators, which again, there's a website that gives you more information on that. I'm not going to go through a lot of numbers because this is what we've done. I think it's more important of what we're going to do going forward. If you look at there's 2.9 million PPP loans totaling over $190 billion has been guaranteed in the 2021 PPP funding round. So I'm going to That information I don't think is that important. I think it's what we do going forward. As well as it's more numbers about the breakdown in the funds and how much money we spent. So Emma, I'm going kind of quick through this. So if you go to the
No,
next
that's
slide.
fine. You're doing fine.
Okay. If you go to the
Keep
next
it there.
slide, go through the next slide, we get to the Paycheck Protection Program. One more slide, I think, right there. The deadline, as was mentioned, for lenders to get the PPP loan applications into SBA is still March the 31st, but this is not official, but I'm told that the Senate is supposed to be voting on an extension that might take it to May 31st, which again would give the SBA until the end of June to approve those applications. I'm hoping that the extension comes, but again, this is a moving target, but as it stands right now, March the 31st is the deadline. Next slide, please. We'll circle back to the SBOG grant. We've covered that. The application is open on April the 8th, and there is the SBOG portal that again is connected to the FAQs for that. The web seminar, as I mentioned, is set for March 30th. If anyone has any questions, they'd have to be submitted on March the 29th, I think by noon Eastern Standard Time. And they will try to answer as many questions as possible during the webinar, which is going to be the 30th. The next slide, please. The other important parts, there's 5 components there's 3 other additional points I like to make on the Shuttered, the SBOGs, and that is you can now receive both. Initially, it was not allowed, but you can now receive both a PPP loan and also an SBOG loan. And it says to ensure eligible venues do not miss a window to receive assistance. The American Rescue Plan Act amended the SBOG program, so entities that apply for a PPP loan after December the 27th of 2020 can also apply for an SBOG with the eligibility entities SBOG to be reduced by the PPP loan amount. The PPP loan applications have been updated to reflect those changes. And however, under this law, the entities would be ineligible for a PPP loan after they receive the SBOG. The next slide, please, Emma. The 4th thing is to get prepared. And this is where I tell people is where the rubber meets the road. This is the most critical part, is the preparation, and the SBA has created several tools and resources to help potential SBOG applicants to prepare. And again, it circles back to the FAQs as well as video tutorials, a preliminary application check, as well as the eligibility requirement chart. So I would tell anybody on the call to make sure that you cross your T's and dot your I's so you'll know if you qualify. And then the most important one in all these 5 things to know, Emma is based in California, in LA. I'm based on the East Coast. I report out of the headquarters in Washington, even though I wish I could come to LA from time to time. But suffice it to say, the local SBA partners are there at the grassroots level to help any of your any entity that needs some counseling on how to set it up, where to get the resources. It's like a one-stop shopping venue where people can get information as pertains to what they need. So I'm going to close it off right there, Regina, and we can kind of open it up for questions. I will tell you that Emma and I will give you what we know as it relates to the information. But if we default back to the FAQs or emailing that particular question, because we know there are changes that are still being approved, possibly, and we don't want to be premature in our answers, but we can tell you what we know. So with that, unless Emma, you have anything to add to that, we can kind of move on to the next speaker, I would assume.
Yes, but I wanted to say thank you, Ronald. And when we tell you This was a last minute changes came across like this morning, and we actually put this last PowerPoint together in probably less than an hour. So please excuse some of the errors, but it was just information that we wanted you guys to know. We can't tell you everything, as you know. We can't say this is going to happen, that's going to happen. But we try to be transparent about what's out there. Please, please, please go to all the links that were mentioned. Click on them. You'll get a lot of information. Also, the Q&As came out on the 22nd. They've been updated. It's 26 pages now. So thank you for allowing us to just share this information. And thank you, Ron. You did a fabulous job at the last minute. Thank you.
Thank you all. Really appreciate that's a lot of information to cover very quickly. I'm confused. I think based on what I'm seeing in the chat, and I think what I've been hearing is there will be a new round of PPP, right? And it's not clear yet what's the same and what's different going forward. Is that right?
Not necessarily. It might be. Who knows? We can't answer that question. But we can tell you that it was supposed to expire, like Ron said, at the end of the month, that we're waiting to see if the decision is going to be made to expand it, the existing PPP program.
I think the money level stays the same unless there is some more carve out in the 1.9. I think that right now, the most important part, the money is available, and I think they just want to get an extension beyond the 31st, hopefully, depending on how the pendulum swings, to see if that's going to happen. Obviously, if they extend it, it'll give more opportunity for folks to get those dollars. And if that's the case and they exhaust all those funds, I would assume there have to be a replenishing of those funds. But at this point, Emma, as you said, we are not sure other than what we were told preliminary about the possible extension.
It seemed also like, when we think about the early days of PPP, it seemed to sort of skew more toward business. And it seems like it's evolved a bit to accommodate that nonprofits have different issues, that there's a role to play in the economic recovery of our nation. So I guess I've been kind of optimistic. I don't know, Lucy and Chris, if you guys are feeling that too, but it seems like there's been a greater understanding that these loans are really going to help community-based organizations get services into communities if they can get through the snow.
I agree. I mean, the CalNonprofits has been doing webinars on the PPP with SBA representatives, not Ron and Emma, but folks from the San Francisco office and others. And I think it's been an education process for all of us. We've all been on a learning curve, but I do feel like the SBA and programs overall that have been focused more on small business are understanding better how these can serve nonprofits and tailoring some of the information, which is great, and those FAQs that Emma and Ron mentioned to address some of the specific concerns that nonprofits have, like what do you put down in the owner box and those kinds of things.
Right.
I also like to add that just to tag along with what Lucy's saying, I think as you first come out with a program, this is I'm just speaking from my observation, is that I think as you see all the impacted entities, I think when you get a chance to do this again or revise it, you now are bringing in those other entities like the nonprofits and those types of things. But perception-wise, you look at it and say, well, there's 33 million, if not more, small businesses, but there are also nonprofits linked in between all of that number that probably add culturally and in other ways to the economy and those types of things. So I think when I had a chance to help work on the EIDL loans themselves, and there was the nonprofit entity, because I think the interest rate was 2.75, I think, on the loans for the nonprofit. So I think as we move forward, I think there's more of a light being shine on those, with light was shining on those, more attention rather given to those entities going forward. But We just have to wait and see, but hopefully there's a balancing act. We'll get some balance here, some parity.
You know, on that note, a couple of people have asked about potentially increasing their existing loan to a larger amount. Is that a mechanism that's available to people?
right.
Now, loan, there's so many different loans. Are they referring to the EIDL loan, which
It's
there
about
was?
SBA loan recipient. Dennis, I don't know if you want to speak up on your question.
Hi, yeah, this is Dr. Young with the Children's Dental Center. I saw something that said the EIDL loan was going to increase from the 150,000 to 500,000, and that existing customers, if you want to call it that way, would get an email from the SBA saying, do you want to increase to the max or a certain number? I just wondered if that's the case.
I read that too, and I think that would be my interpretation, that the cap was raised to 500,000. I think it's almost like the idle advance, the advance that was exhausted, and then the folks that didn't get into that the first go around. I think SBA sent emails out to those folks to, for example, if they got $5,000 and their money ran out, then they would make them whole and give them the other 5,000 to get them to the $10,000 max. So I think that I did read where there is a reach out. Would there be someone would reaching out to those folks to see if they wanted to increase their loans? I think that's pretty accurate. Yes.
Yeah, because what we had was we were like the second or so, and they had run out of money, and they put that cap where it was, I think, originally up to 3 mil. And then they put a cap and said, no, you're only going to get 150 max because that's all the money we have. That's why I was saying is that now they're going to say, okay, we'll go back to those people and say, do you want to go to the new cap of 500?
I think you're right, but you know what? If I remember reading through those 24 pages, 25 pages of FAQs, I think somewhere in there that was addressed.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
And if it's a situation whereby the SBA is going to do that, they will reach out to you. And based on the type of loan you had and all the details with that loan, they will reach out to you and give you an opportunity if they were to increase it. And this is the same thing as Ronald talked about the idle advance. If they feel that you did not get the full amount that you deserve, you do not have to contact the SBA. The SBA will reach out to you. And if you didn't receive an email, there are some that are still going out. But if you qualify, they will reach out to you. And what you have to do is submit any documentations that they're asking you to provide, or either whether it's an increase of your original loan or it has to do with the idle advance.
Thank you.
Chris, I'm curious, with all of the programs that you talked about where, you know, it can potentially be a nonprofit service provider or a network of service providers, is that essentially, you know, is the action item keep an eye on county contracting opportunities that are coming up? Is that, how do we find out what's kind of new and next?
It's going to depend on the area. It's different in childcare than it is in housing, than it is in behavioral health. You know, so the childcare development block grants, you know, will come through the usual formula there, and the state helps disperse those funds. The state has been slow about that, to be completely honest. If the money that came out from the CARES Act, for instance, so the money was authorized back in March and April, and the state didn't have most of the funds even out the door until the end of the year. And so there's been a push to get them to move those funds faster. The rental assistance dollars, some of those will flow directly to the nonprofit organizations, but then yes, keep an eye on the local governments that'll also be receiving some of those funds and work with nonprofits. The behavioral health funds, some of that will come directly to substance abuse treatment programs that nonprofits are running, and to mental health service clinics. But it's got, and a lot of it is still the money still to come out. So, it just depends on which arena you're operating in, and then watching the federal and state delivery mechanism for the announcement about here's when, or here's what you have to do to apply, or what kinds of requirements are there. And so that's the area, to go back to your comments at the beginning, Regina, where there's often less known, and now everybody's in the administration and implementation mode.
Regina, in some of my state level information, I've got a slide about the state grants portal. That might be one way that nonprofits can find out more about additional funding coming in those areas.
Thanks, Lucy. I think that's going to be really helpful. And thanks, Chris, because that is a lot to keep track of. I'm curious, Lucy, as you think about, and Chris, a lot of decisions are going to be made in Sacramento in the next 60, 90 days as well. And as we think about the voice of the nonprofit sector, as you guys were talking about connecting with your electeds, are there particular opportunities that you think right now are keeping an eye, weigh in? You talked loosely about the letter to send about that definitely can help hear from our sector, but also very specifically a reminder of the role that the nonprofit sector plays in this recovery, and getting dollars directed to that. I'm curious if you guys think there are some things to keep an eye on, or move on, or call on, or email on as we think about, the last quarter of this fiscal year for the state.
Well, I've got a set of slides on state stuff that I can talk about in a minute. So, but the slide that I did on the local government funding, there's also going to be money going to the state that will trickle down to smaller local governments. So if you aren't in a city of 50,000 or more, I would still really encourage you to go to your elected officials in your city and ask them what they're doing to advocate for state resources, because there will be some additional local government funding that the state will have and will be parceling out. So it's another opportunity for advocacy there, and for getting resources that can go to nonprofits, especially in the smaller areas, the more rural areas.
Yeah, I would just jump in here and also note that, we usually talk about what's happening in the cycle of the annual state budget, which has to be completed by the end of June, but the deal usually gets struck by early June. So that's happening in a very intense period of time. I would note that it's not a sure thing, but there's also a second opportunity that may come up even more urgently for advocacy, which is Governor Newsom and state leaders put a stimulus package of their own together a couple of months ago called the Golden State Stimulus Package. There's a lot of speculation that there will be a second package like that before the budget gets enacted. Maybe it'll happen afterwards, but that package that happened back a month ago or so included aid for small businesses and nonprofit organizations. And so that could happen again. And with the influx of flexible aid to the state could use some of the funds, particularly given that the state's revenues are actually doing better than expected. The state could use the influx of these one-time funds to build its own second stimulus package that would both help low-income households, nonprofits, small businesses that have been harmed by the pandemic. So that may be on its own timeline, separate from the budget. So just something to watch out for.
Yeah, thank you. I know CalNonprofits has been working on that in partnership with the industry and the folks in Sacramento.
Can I share some of my information on that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. Erin, can you reboot up my PowerPoint? Okay, great. So I did, thank you, Chris, for that segue. There is still money in the current pot, and I didn't know that there's a possibility of additional funds. So that's a good thing to know about. If you don't already know about the California Relief Grant Program, it is being run through the California Office of the Small Business Advocate. Right now is the last day if you are a cultural institution to apply for a grant. The grants are $5,000, $15,000, and $25,000. They're not huge amounts, but every little bit helps. I did want to say that nonprofits are being included in this relief program that is primarily addressing small business needs because we advocated for it. CalNonprofits, other nonprofits, and our legislative allies. So I just want to point out that our advocacy really can make a difference. And I'll put this URL in the chat, but this is how you can go right to the information about this grant program and apply directly. So we can go to the next slide. I mentioned that we're currently in the round for cultural institutions. That's just nonprofits and just certain kinds of arts and cultural institutions. There's $50 million set aside for those grants. And that round ends at 5 p.m. today. So if you're a cultural institution and you haven't applied, please do so today. Round 5 of that funding started, I believe, yesterday and goes for about a week. That's open to all kinds of nonprofits and small businesses with a revenue cap of 2.5 million annual gross revenue. And you can see that, I think Chris kind of referred to it, that an additional $2.1 billion was added to this program through a bill, Senate Bill 87, that a budget bill that was rushed through. So they are at the state level rushing through some of these relief bills to make sure that people have access to the funding very quickly. Let's go to the next slide. Well, I was going to talk about a couple of bills, Regina. I don't know if is this a good time to do that, or
yeah,
but
I
also
think
have
it's
to do.
important that we talk about what's on the
Okay.
on the table right now, and to remind everybody that they have a role to play in making this happen.
Okay, yes, we all do. So I just wanted to cover a few of the bills that are in response to the COVID-19 emergency, but that pertain particularly to the needs of nonprofits. It really became clear to us last year. We did a survey of nonprofits and we heard from 630 of you saying that contracts with state agencies and with local agencies have really been a challenge, that your performance has had to change because of the COVID conditions. And yet it's been difficult sometimes to get the flexibility you need to adapt your programs and still get paid on contract. So this is a bill that would essentially allow for that to happen in any emergency. Whenever there's a declared emergency, nonprofits would be able to adjust their services as long as they are following the general intent of the contract that they had. They can adjust their services. Agencies are expected to continue to pay them on contract. So now this is just under emergency circumstances, but if we had this law before this virus, it would have made a big difference for California nonprofits. So it's gone through on consent in its first committee, and it's looking good for the Appropriations Committee on the Senate side. So there are opportunities to support this bill. Regina can tell you more about that, but I'll put some information in the chat too. You can sign on to a sign-on letter. Let's move to the next one. We also realize that as part of nonprofits having to navigate contract relationships with agencies during an emergency, that there really needs to be a designated person in state agencies to help us comply with regulations, to help us navigate contract issues. So this bill, Senate Bill 543, it's a Limon bill, would require any agency that interacts in a significant way with nonprofits to have a designated nonprofit liaison, somebody we can go to say, hey, I need help, this isn't working, I need flexibility on my contract, whatever. And this is another bill that we're sponsoring, and there's also a sign-on letter that you can join on. Some of the agencies are saying that there's a significant cost to them of having this liaison, so we're coming up against some opposition. It would be great to have a rally of support for this bill so we can try to get it out of the Appropriations Committee and get it signed into law. Let's go to the next one. I also wanted to mention, I mean, all of us as nonprofits rely on online fundraising platforms. There is a bill right now to regulate those platforms to help make sure that donors know where their money's going and that nonprofits get the money that fundraising platforms are saying is going to go to them. So we're very involved in that. And as you can imagine, there are a lot of tech companies also involved in Amazon, PayPal, etc. But it's a good one to know about because it will, I think, make it better for donors and for recipient charities. That's us. Okay, and then I did also want to let you know, if you aren't signed up to get updates about from the state grants portal, go to their website and sign up. This is a one-stop shopping location for nonprofits to access any grant programs, so not contract programs, but any grant programs that state agencies have. And pretty much every state agency, I think, has agreed to get their information to the state library. The state library is administering the portal. We're going to be doing a webinar on the 14th of April with the library folks on the grants portal. So I'll make sure Regina gets information about it. It's still in the works, so I don't have a link yet for that. But if you go to the grants.ca.gov website, I'm sure they'll be posting about it too. And this, again, came about because of a CalNonprofits sponsored bill that was signed into law in 2018. So our advocacy really can make a difference. And I think I've only got one more slide. I just wanted to, there's my contact information. If you have policy issues you think we need to know about it that affect us as nonprofits across the state, please reach out to me, or if you have questions. I also wanted to let you know about our legislative tracker. We track all the bills that we think have significant, potentially a significant effect on nonprofits. We list which ones we support, which ones we oppose if we're opposing some, and some that we're just watching. So there's summaries of all those bills on our website through our ledge tracker, and there's the URL for that. So I think that's it.
Thanks, Lucy. There's a lot of different questions here. I'm so glad you talked about the legislative advocacy piece. The thing that our sector has on its side is that, everyone's trying to figure out how to help communities that have been most impacted. And that's the work all of you guys are doing. So when you talk about what we know from CNM is that, a lot of people went through furloughs last year. A lot of people are concerned about revenue reductions in the current year. And government's the biggest funder. So they need to hear from us about what we can do with those dollars to help get communities back on their feet and residents the support they need and, during this time. So one question,
Regina,
I'm sorry, somebody want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I didn't, this is Ron. I wanted to circle back if I could and try to answer more specifically the question that the gentleman asked about getting more money or not getting enough money. Is there more money available? And if you look at the FAQs, just real quick, question 19 is, what if I need more money than I've been approved for? And it says here, I'll just be brief here. COVID-19 IDLs can be modified by increasing the amount up to 6 months of working capital or a maximum of $150,000, whichever is less. An increase can be requested either by or after accepting a loan. The applicant just has to send an email asking for an increase, and then they will revisit the application, I guess, and ask for some other information. But the person would have to sign the IRS form 4506T to give IRS the authorization to look at those look at the documents for the tax filings. And then one of them that's connected with that is, I already have received a COVID-19 idle loan funds, and my business is not recovered yet from the impact of the COVID shutdowns. Would I qualify for more federal assistance? And that question is also answered in there. And well, I don't want to belabor to take up any more time, but the FAQs, as I mentioned, is a plethora of information there that could answer a lot of those questions. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Katie, I'm kind of curious. I don't know, kind of to that point, what you're saying in the chat is that because of the grants and loans, you were in a better financial position. So now you're not able to qualify for some of the new programs that are coming up. So Katie, is there anything you wanted to add about that? If there, Ron, I'm not sure if we have too much clarity around that yet with the new, right? Katie, I don't know if you wanted to add anything or.
I was trying to understand the question that they were asking. I was looking in the chat, trying to read some of those questions. But someone did ask about if an entity that applied for a first and second PPP draw loan on or after December 2020, eligible to apply for the SBLG, and the answer is yes. While it entitles originally, it was prohibited, but they have changed the law. The American Rescue Plan Act, which became law on March 11th, removed this restriction. However, under the law, entities will be ineligible for a PPP loan after they receive the SBOG. So they can get it. Prior to, they were not allowed to apply for the SBOG, but they now can apply for the SBOG. You can't get both.
Right. So
that
sort of double dipping theme has been consistent, but if you're not a shuttered organization, it sounds like it's not really clear yet if you can apply for additional.
This is Katie, and you were asking the question, but I was muted. My question is, I tried to apply for the PPP loan, and I'm looking at these other loans. I survived 2020, but they're asking for comparison financial data. And then since I got the PPP and I got the California relief loan, it looks like I don't need anything in 2021. And so I can't even apply for the PPP because I don't qualify because of what I did get in grants in 2020. That's my question.
So it looks like the grants you got somewhat help mitigate your losses. And I guess your losses don't meet that threshold to get additional funds. Is that basically it, Kay?
Well, what it's saying is that I can't continue to get the relief in 2021 because I got it in 2020, but I'm looking at 2021 and I'm going, oh my gosh, I can't have my events still. I'm still going to have some significant losses. My program isn't being run the way it used to, and it's costing me more now because we had to do a different delivery model. So I don't have the availability for funds in 2021 because when I give them the data for my 2020, it looks like, oh, she's fine. Or, you know, her nonprofit is fine, and it's not.
What if though, you know, that's a good question. I think that might be a good question to be answered on the webinar. If you pose that question between now and the 29th, I think they have time to research that. My take would be, since they raised the cap on some of those to, for example, Idle is 500,000, you would be a perfect candidate. I'll be able to apply for that. But I think your question is a great question. And I think I would really send that email in to the webinar for them to get some answers, or they might answer you back directly.
Yeah.
Exactly
well,
what I would do.
I appreciate that because I've looked into everything and I went and I did it with my accountant and he says, Katie, you don't qualify for PPP. Pardon me?
Yeah, you know what, we can follow up on that as well because I have a feeling this question is going to come up. I want to be careful about time, and I wanted to get the last two questions. I think Mary asks a question about sort of capital improvements, HVAC, stuff like that, if there's funding available for building upgrades. Does anybody know about resources for that?
Well, if it was brought about, if she's just doing purely upgrades, or if some type of disaster caused that, then she could apply for a loan that would help put her property back to its original state. If she's expanding, I think the PPP loans and I do address or allowed to be spent on those types of things. I do know that.
COVID-related modifications.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Lucy, on the idea of when the grant awards could start to happen. And it
For the
sounds
gra-
like there's
for the
phases,
state-
right? So it's kind of
for
a
the-
moving target, right?
Yeah, for the state program, it is a moving target. Today's the deadline for the round for the cultural institutions, but they are going to be looking at applications and making sure that all of the documents are in for round 4 up until May 15th. And that is to allow more time for nonprofits who have applied to get their 2019 990 in, because the 2019 990 is a requirement for getting one of these grants. So get your basic application in today, but you would have more time to submit your documents. And that's true for round 5 as well.
Is there a
Which is-
timeline when the money will start to be distributed?
The money for the early rounds is already being distributed. So folks who applied in rounds 1, 2, and 3, as they check to verify all the documents are in, they are sending award letters and putting money in people's bank accounts. So it has been happening for those first 3 rounds.
Super. Well, I know we had a lot to cover, and I really appreciate you guys for trying to do this juggling act with many spinning plates. But for all of you that spent time with us today, thank you. We know that this is a lot, and we know you have a lot of things to do with your day. So it was good to see you, and happy Friday. And to our speakers, thank you so much. We really appreciate the update and you sharing what you know with us, and many links to many new opportunities. So I know that'll make a difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody.